I'm Menachem Learfield, and this is Dear Rabbi, where we answer your questions about Judaism. This week on Dear Rabbi, is Israel an apartheid state? The question itself, to be honest, is a little bit offensive. It's offensive both to Jews everywhere, as well as Israelis and people who live and support Israel. But it's also really offensive to those who are victims of true apartheid in South Africa. When we use the term apartheid, and I'm assuming you're coming from the Amnesty International report, the term itself is specifically meant to delegitimize the very moral foundation of Israel and to stigmatize Israel and isolate it in the community of nations. Aside from the fact that it's blatantly false, I think it actually is offensive to those who are victims of real apartheid, meaning the institutionalized, decades-long racism of white minority rule in South Africa. Israel is clearly not an apartheid state. First of all, if you've been to Israel, and I always find that when we lead trips to Israel, one of the most eye-opening experiences is seeing how Muslims in full Muslim garb are treated like regular citizens, like everybody else. They're sitting in the same cafes, shopping in the same malls. It's crazy to think that Israel can be accused of being an apartheid state when the current coalition government, and just to explain what that means, is it's not like a two-party system we have here in America. In order for a government to take control of the country, in order to have a prime minister and to have an established government, you need a coalition. And for those who have been following Israeli politics, that was very difficult in this last election period. It took several tries, but they do have a current governing coalition, and that current government is entirely dependent on one of the Arab political parties. And they do have Arab political parties. Arabs can not only vote, but they're actually members of the Knesset, and currently they're one of the most important political parties in the country. That means that without the Arab party, the current government would fall apart. Period. Apartheid? Hard to believe. Israel is a remarkably diverse country with people from all backgrounds, and Arab citizens have the same rights as everybody else. There are Arab doctors and nurses and judges even on the Supreme Court of Israel. In fact, there was an Arab judge who sent a former Israeli president to prison. You're telling me that's apartheid? When you have a country where you have Jews and Arabs working side by side in every setting imaginable, whether it's the Supreme Court, whether it's your local hospitals, stores, shops, malls, it's really hard to call that an apartheid state. And doing so is really just in order to delegitimize Israel and add on to the claims that it doesn't have the right to exist. We're not talking about Hamas, which is a terrorist organization that has made very clear their intentions to wipe Israel off the face of the earth with the help of Iran. We're talking about Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, and really the place that Arabs are treated better than any other place in the Middle East. Anyone with any intellectual honesty can understand that this is not an apartheid state.